the earth, but to celebrate the native plants that help our ecosystems and our pollinators. I would like to welcome Miss Kathy Clary. Kathy lives in Afton, Virginia, where she writes a blog and consults on the home landscape. Her website is www.hallowgarden.com. She taught horticulture and landscape design for the University of Virginia's Personal Enrichment Program for 14 years. She worked as the head gardener at Albemarle House, landscape supervisor at Morven Estate, and gardener at Monticello. As a freelance writer, her columns and articles have appeared in C-VILLE Weekly and Abode, Virginia Gardener, Virginia Living, Fine Gardening, and the Virginia Garden Guide. So we would like to thank her for doing this talk tonight. We are so excited to have her. Just a couple housekeeping items before we begin. This is being recorded and will be posted to our website in the next few days. So once it's posted, feel free to share it with your friends. We love sharing our programs. Please mute yourself if you have not done so. And please put your questions in the chat box and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So I will now turn it over to Kathy so that we can learn all about native plants.
Okay, let me share my screen. And here we are. All right, is this looking good, Susie?
It looks good.
All right, let's go then. All right, well, I'm very happy to be with you all tonight. And thank you so much, Susie and Ivy Creek Foundation for asking me to speak. And I am here to totally confuse you about native plants. And I'm hoping at the end, you'll have some idea about the state of the debate over native plants in the horticultural world, and maybe learn a little bit more about the beautiful plants that surround us here in Central Virginia. Now, native plants have been at the center of American horticulture for quite some time now. It's been nearly, oh, that's right. Can people see when I hold this book up? Okay.
Yes.
But it's backwards. Anyway, native plants have been at the center of American horticulture for many, many years. And it has been 30 years since Sarah Stein wrote her seminal Noah's Garden about restoring the ecology of our own backyards. Now, every book and author that I mentioned tonight will be listed in a final slide, so you can take a screenshot or note down titles of books and authors. So don't worry about that. I think the impact of Sarah Stein and Noah's Garden is similar to the impact that Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had when she alerted everyone to the dangers of pesticides. And I think most of us remember how struck we were when she opened the door on the effects of pesticides. And Sarah Stein in Noah's Garden did a similar thing about suburban development and what happens when people try to garden and landscape in their new homes in suburbia. She and her husband retired and they began landscaping around their beautiful retirement home. And I'll just read you one little quote. She says, "As it was, it took us only a few summers of straightening up the place to degrade or destroy the habitat of most of the animals that had previously lived here." So she wrote Noah's Garden about how they restored the habitats around their home that they had unwittingly destroyed by using conventional gardening methods. So let's begin with a review of a few basics. Oh my goodness, Susie, my slides are not advancing.
Okay.
I'm pushing the arrow. Should I go into escape and
Yeah,
just,
hit escape.
okay. Oh my goodness, I seem to be frozen.
Okay, hit stop sharing.
Oh, okay. Now, let me see.
Are you still frozen?
Well, let me bring I'm going to bring the slideshow up like this and see if, there, I'm into my second slide there.
Okay.
Shall we
Just
perhaps continue like this?
hit share screen again.
Okay, I'm so sorry about this. I don't really have that option here.
You want me to share my screen?
You mean so that, here, sorry about all this. All right, we're on share screen. Oh. Okay. I think if everybody doesn't mind, I think I will do better here, but I don't think you'll be able to see me when I show the slides this way. Is that okay?
Can you send them to Susie?
Well, Susie's got them. Do you want to go with you doing it, Susie?
Yeah, we can do me.
Oh, wait a minute. It's working now. I'm so sorry. All right, here we are. Let's just continue.
Hit share screen again.
Oh. Well, let's just stay like this, shall we? All right. Is that okay with you, Susie?
That looks fine.
Okay,
If you're happy with that.
If I can go through my slides, I will be happy. All right. So we are now going to talk about all the definitions of native plants. An early idea of what a native plant is was that native plants are ones that appear without human intervention. But of course, as people started thinking about it, they realized that that ignores the role of human beings and indigenous people like the Native Americans and other human beings who are just like the other animals and move plants and seeds around. So that definition of not having human intervention went by the boards early on when people started thinking about native plants. Now, another common definition of native plants is a plant that was growing in North America before the Europeans came in the 1600s, the 17th century. And then, of course, we get into the whole issue of what area are we talking about when we're talking about native plants. We can be talking about North America, the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic region, Virginia, Central Virginia, Albemarle County. And many native plant lovers and supporters of native plants get very, very specific about what area the plants are native to, especially people who are concerned with habitat restoration, which is how Sarah Stein started this whole thing with Noah's Garden. So here we see a picture of a beautiful meadow in the Bundoran Farms area out here in Batesville near where I live. This is native fleabane, which many people consider to be a weed, but it is native to North America and obviously Central Virginia. This is the predominant part of this meadow. So now we see another picture of, this is actually the meadow out where I live in my hollow out here in Afton. And this is, I consider this a native meadow. It certainly had no human intervention on my part other than having it mowed once a year. And so here we see the beautiful native switchgrass, the panicum, and the broom sedge throughout here, this brown seed heads here that makes up the majority of the grasses. And then we see the purple top coming up, another beautiful native grass. And then we see the beautiful spangles of the Queen Anne's lace. And Queen Anne's lace is one of those wildflowers that was brought over by the colonists in the 1600s. So the question to many people becomes, do we consider Queen Anne's lace and also the beautiful blue chicory, which I'm sure you all have seen, do we consider them native because they weren't here before the colonists brought them over? So do plants become native when they become naturalized, if they've been here long enough? So this question is very much a part of the whole native plant discussion. And Doug Tallamy, who wrote this book, Bringing Nature Home, he wrote this and published this 7 years after Sarah Stein. And he picked up the conversation at the point where Sarah Stein left it off, about how we can bring native plants into our home landscapes. Now, the way Doug Tallamy is a professor of ecology at the University of Delaware, so he's a scientist, and he approaches this in a very scientific way. Now, according to Doug Tallamy, who is really the reigning guru of native plants in America, as far as I can tell these days, according to Doug Tallamy, 400 years since European introduction does not stack up against the millions of years of evolution that Tallamy, as a scientist, believes are necessary for a native plant to develop its flower structure, its bloom time, and all the other different biological characteristics that make native plants the proper and best sustenance for our native insects and animals. So to Tallamy, you need a truly native plant needs to have been around a lot longer than just having been introduced by the Europeans, like this Rose Bay rhododendron, Rhododendron catabiense, is a beautiful native rhododendron that's been growing in our woodlands for thousands and thousands of years. This was definitely here before Queen Anne's lace and before the colonists. So no matter how old they are, Queen Anne's lace and chicory are beautiful additions to our natural meadows. And they're not so aggressive that they outcompete native plants. And as we go on, I think we'll see that this issue of how aggressive a non-native plant is becomes the key issue around native plants. Now here, this is an example of a classic sterile urban landscape that, aside from the native hawthorns, if you can see my little arrow here, I'm pointing to the hawthorn. That's a native tree, the hawthorn. It has thorns on it, which are poking out here at eye level for the pedestrians up and down the walkway. And it has beautiful red berries. So that's a native tree. But other than that, this landscape is full of English ivy, which is proceeding to climb the tree, Nandina, which is an Asian plant, and Asian hollies back here, which offer nothing at all to native pollinators. And my understanding, and I'd be happy to be corrected later on when we get to questions if anyone knows differently, but my understanding is that Nandina berries, you know, they have the red berries, have actually been found to be poisonous to some migrating birds. So Nandina, Chinese hollies, and English ivy are on the do not plant list for anyone who is concerned about creating healthy ecosystems or restoring habitats. And indeed, this is a very old landscape. This is the kind of landscape that no modern urban planner would ever plant today. This is a relic of the old bad past, but it's a good example of the sterility of these kinds of plants, because, you know, we see nothing that any pollinator is going to land on in these things. Oh, let's see. Now, the third author that I'm going to mention, and actually there are a few more, but they're all on the final slide, is Tayo Orion, who has written this book, Beyond the War on Invasive Species. And she is a professor of permaculture out in Oregon. at Oregon State University. And she published her Beyond the War on Invasive Species back in 2015. And she gives voice to the whole permaculture movement, which coined the term sustainability, which we all are so familiar with today, the idea of a sustainable landscape. And many permaculturists are concerned about what they see as an overuse and an over-reliance on the use of herbicides by people who are, with all the goodwill in the world, trying to restore native habitats. And indeed, I have seen this in the different contacts that I have, that the use of, and I'll just say Roundup is one of the most ubiquitous of the herbicides, that people will not only use it to eliminate non-native aggressive plants in a site where they're going to plant, but they will fall into using it as a regular maintenance tool also, because it's easier. And permaculturists like Tyle Orion and many others are very concerned about the slow, gradual, inevitable buildup of all these herbicides in our groundwater. So that's another issue that's part of this whole subject of native plants. Now, and Tyle Orion reminds us that invasive species, like it or not, are part of nature. So Orion and the other permaculturists have begun to switch the perspective and say that instead of judging plants on whether they're native or how long they've been here or where they came from, when we're judging their usefulness in our environment, we should judge them on the ecological functions that they perform. This is a total permaculture concept that I think is becoming more widely disseminated. So what the permaculturists want us to think about is not so much, did the colonists bring it over? How long has it been here? They want us to think, does that plant fix nitrogen in the soil? Black locust will do that. That's a lovely native. Red buds will do that. Clover will do that, which is a European introduction. Russian olive, the autumn olive, which is a terrible aggressive weed, that also fixes nitrogen in the soil. We want to know, does it absorb phosphorus? Phosphorus is one of the worst pollutants that we have, and it comes from farmers and industrial agriculture over fertilizing, putting too much fertilizer on their fields so that it washes off into the groundwater, into the streams, into the bay, where the phosphorus causes these huge algae blooms, which kill our native grasses and kill off our native fisheries. So excess phosphorus is really, really bad. And people who put fertilizer on their lawns and golf courses and industrial agriculture and everybody who uses chemical fertilizers are contributing to this problem. So when we find plants that can actually absorb and suck up excess phosphorus, that's a good thing. And there are many native plants that do it. I believe switchgrass is one that's very popular in rain gardens. You put it there and it's actually taking up those toxins, which is a good thing. But there are also non-native plants that absorb phosphorus, like kudzu, for God's sake, and butterfly bush, which people who make butterfly gardens love the butterfly bush because it feeds the pollinators, but it is an Asian plant. It's not a native plant, and it has a tendency to reseed. Oh, so pollination, does the plant offer food for pollinators? And I think we've seen that natives and non-natives can do that. Then the question is, does the plant support caterpillars? And this is the issue that Doug Tallamy really focuses on, because his mission is to save the birds and the butterflies. And the way he sees to do that, and he certainly seems to be right, is to promote the plants that our native caterpillars live on. And of course, our classic example is the symbiotic relationship between the milkweed, this beautiful milkweed here, and the monarch butterfly. Now in this slide, that's a fritillary. That's not a monarch, but I suspect the fritillaries lay their eggs on the milkweed too. But I think most of us are familiar with the idea that the monarch butterflies have to lay their eggs on a milkweed plant, because if the eggs hatch out and they're not hatching out on a milkweed plant, they will literally starve. So the butterflies, the monarch butterflies at least, and I suspect the fritillaries, they need the milkweed. So this is a very strong argument for planting native plants, because they support our native caterpillars, which are food for our native birds and our insects. And I think this is an area where non-native plants do fall very short. I don't believe there are really any non-native plants that support our native caterpillars. So Talamy's definitely got a point on that. Does the plant provide seed heads for wildlife? We will see in another couple of slides, there are non-native plants, actually aggressive plants, like the multiflora rose, that provide beautiful seed heads that the wildlife does eat. The autumn olive, the dread autumn olive, feeds the birds. But for naturalists like Doug Tallamy, that's a bad thing, because when the birds eat the seeds of the autumn olive or the seeds of the multiflora rose, they fly away on their migration and poop the seeds out, and then they're spreading those non-native plants. Does the plant provide shelter? My forsythia patch, which is non-native, provides much shelter for many, many wildlife. The dreaded autumn olive provides shelter. So many non-native plants do provide shelter. Does it provide soil stability? Many times in overdeveloped areas, we come across areas that have just been totally denuded of any plants at all. It's just bare soil. So many permaculturalists point out, well, there's something like tree of heaven or autumn olive is colonizing this area, at least it's stabilizing the soil. So there are many, many different issues to consider when we think about the difference between native plants and non-native plants. And this whole idea of ecological function, I think, is becoming just as important as the question of where did a plant originate and how long has it been here. Now here is a pretty sterile landscape here. I believe that is an Amelanchier in the background, which is a native tree. But these are green giant arborvitae right here, which I believe are native to the Northwest, but they're not native to Central Virginia. And then the whole palette here is miscanthus grass. That's the tall regular miscanthus in the background, and this is the dwarf 3 to 4 foot miscanthus in the front. So this is providing virtually nothing for pollinators. But another problem, especially with miscanthus grass, is that it seeds into native woodlands. And this is an urban condo development here, right on Ivy Road in Charlottesville. And you, excuse me, and you see a little patch of woods up here, which we see so often in our developed area. We see the developed area, and then we see the little patch of woodland that's left. And who knows for how long before somebody builds something on that, or maybe it will remain as a patch of woodland. But as long as this miscanthus is growing here, that miscanthus is going to spread into that woodland. So that's a real no-no to plant if you're looking to protect native habitats. There is a woodland on the way from Charlottesville to Batesville, where I live, that has been totally, the understory has been totally taken over by miscanthus grass. So be aware of that. Now here is a totally opposite landscape planting. This is holding a bank. There's a house up here to the right. There's a field that gets cut for hay at the bottom. They have this beautiful wildflower meadow with coneflower, Queen Anne's lace, which we will allow as a naturalized plant right here. A little bit of Monarda, looks like Monarda fistulosa there, the pink right through there. That's the bergamot, the rudbeckia, and this beautiful native plant that you don't see that much of. See the vertical one that looks like a trident? That's Culver's root, C-U-L-V-E-R, Culver's root, a lovely native that is all of these native perennials, and they are all perennials, are doing very well on this hot, sunny bank. So that's hot sun, well drained. And another thing to remember about natives is that in general, and this is one of their selling points, they're generally low fertility plants. They don't need a lot of fertilizer, like a rose or a delphinium or tomatoes. Our native plants, in fact, often do not do well if they are over fertilized. They put on a lot of vegetative growth, they don't bloom. So one of the arguments in favor of natives is that they use a lot less resources than non-native plants. Now, this beautiful, diverse pollinator garden here requires much, much different maintenance than this sterile grass planting here. This is a very simple planting, a very dangerous, simple planting. This is a very beneficial, more complicated planting. When you're getting it established, there's going to be weeding involved. If you do a very thick planting of plugs and then overseed it, you have a much better chance of a good sustainable planting coming up. Plant it thickly and then just mow it once a year. Here are some brambles coming up in the middle, probably something like raspberry or blackberry or something. So you want to mow it once a year as though it were a meadow. Essentially, this is kind of a meadow planting, although it doesn't have any grasses in it really. But it needs a certain amount of weeding, especially when it's getting established. Once a year or so, you have to go through there and rogue out any invasives that you see invading it. It needs to be mowed once a year, but it's a much healthier and much more beautiful planting, and it's a native planting. And here we go, the dreaded burning bush. This is another non-native, excuse me, Asian plant that we do not want to add to our landscapes. Many people love this plant. I actually had a client who had sentimental attachments to it, and they also love that vivid, vivid fall color. But there are many other native plants that can give us beautiful fall color. The dogwood up here that's showing its berries, it's going to turn a beautiful red color in the fall. And there's Virginia sweet spire and clefra, which we'll see more of later on. Beautiful native plants that give us color. We do not want the burning bush. And the reason we don't want the burning bush is because, see this hillside of native woodland and see all the pink in there? That is escaped burning bush. That is apparently doing very well in that dry, shady environment up there. And I know that this property here, and it does not have burning bush on it. So I don't know where the plants are that are being seeded up into here by the birds, but they are somewhere. And eventually, unless someone takes on the heroic task of roguing all these burning bushes out of here, they're going to kind of take over that hillside, and they are going to outcompete the native ground cover. So this is a reason for avoiding these, especially invasive non-native plants like the burning bush and like the miscanthus grass. Now, this is a slide of my East Meadow down here in the hollow, which thankfully has not really been invaded by anything yet, except an occasional Russian olive will show up along the woodland here, and we are roguing them out, just physically removing them. This was our ash, our native ash. He is gone now. He had to be cut down because of the emerald ash borer. But other than that, we have a great native landscape here with an Oakley Hydrangea, the native meadow. We have the red maple. We have oak, hickory, beech. Very, very blessed to have this native woodland here. Now, back to Ptolemy for a moment. He's the professor of ecology at the University of Delaware. And one of the reasons his work in bringing nature home is so seminal is that being a professor, he had this army of graduate students. So what they did at the University of Delaware was they counted all the different Lepidoptera, butterfly. They counted all the different butterfly larvae that are supported by different plants, by native plants by non-native plants. And they found that indeed native plants support vastly more numbers of native butterflies than non-native plants. And they actually came up with remarkable statistics. And one of their statistics is that at the top of the list for supporting native butterfly larvae is the black cherry. This, and see how beautiful it is when its little sepals first come out in the spring. But this is the tree that many people hate because it's also the host to the webworm. It's the one that gets those webby webs in the crotches of its branches, and people will set them on fire, and people will cut down their black cherries because they do not want to see the webworms. And I believe the webworms will eventually hatch into the sphinx moth. And 456 other different butterflies and moths are trying to lay their eggs on these black cherries so that the caterpillars hatch out and our native birds can use them to feed their nestlings. Now, of course, Ptolemy and the native plant people, their argument is that the black cherry and many of the other native plants are being displaced by the autumn olive. And indeed, this is autumn olive slowly marching across this native broom sedge field. Now, the way my husband and I manage this out here, we mow this every year. I suppose eventually we need to get out there and grub this stuff out. But what we are doing at this point is we are mowing it down every year so that it does not flower and it does not seed. And the meadow comes back. Eventually, we are going to have to deal with this because birds, as they are pooping the seeds, are spreading this all throughout nature. Now, another example of a really terrible invasive non-native plant is the Asian bittersweet, which years ago I would see this, and it's still there, I'm sure, in the holiday wreaths. People will make holiday wreaths from it. But again, birds will spread this, and Asian bittersweet will take over the edge of a stream or a woodland. It's trying to do it out here with me, and I am roguing it out as best I can. Now, permaculturists will make the point that many birds will eat these seeds and, use it for sustenance. And also there's the multiflora rose, which I have to confess, I have some multiflora rose along my stream bank and my woodland edge, and a little bit of multiflora rose, I personally don't mind because I think they're pretty and they're not as aggressive as the bittersweet, at least not in my situation. So I'm at the point now where I'm roguing out bittersweet and autumn olive. I haven't gotten yet to the point where I'm roguing out the multiflora rose. Now, to the permaculturists who say the birds feed on these berries, and so they are supporting wildlife to that extent, Ptolemy and the native plant people respond. The problem is that these berries of the invasive non-natives, these berries are only supporting birds after they reproduce each season, and they're providing nothing for the nestlings. They're providing nothing for the baby birds. It's the caterpillars that provide food for the baby birds, and that's where we end up coming back to native plants. So Ptolemy's goal back in 2007 with Bringing Nature Home was not just to celebrate native plants, but it was to unite bird lovers and butterfly lovers in a battle, a war, a fight against what he called invasive aliens. And he did not shy away from using what many people consider a politically incorrect phrase, invasive alien, Asian, aggressive aliens. Ptolemy even said back in 2007 about using that term, he said, as if it really matters. what words that I use. But of course, words do matter, and time marches on and the conversation continues. And 7 years later, after he published Bringing Nature Home, which is the Bible of native plant people today, as well it should be. 7 years after that, Doug Tallamy and Rick Dark published The Living Landscape, which I heartily recommend. And again, this will be on the final slide. The Living Landscape, which accepts the idea of what they call novel ecosystems. And novel ecosystems are those that are made up of a combination of natives and aggressive non-natives. One of the reasons that I love The Living Landscape, not only for Dark and Tallamy's wonderful text, but they have wonderful photographs there. And they have beautiful pictures of landscapes that are made up of Bradford pears, a very aggressive non-native, European reeds, the dreaded autumn olive. But they show landscapes where these plants are growing along with native red cedar, winterberry, little bluestem, and goldenrod. And this is what they call the novel ecosystems that they accept now as a part of nature. So Dark and Tallamy are joining and have joined the permaculturists at this point in recognizing that these kinds of mixed landscapes do provide ecological functions, especially in heavily disturbed marginal landscapes where natives cannot get a foothold because the habitat has changed so drastically. So it isn't always that native plants can't flourish because of aggressive non-natives, but often it's because the ecology has fundamentally changed, either because development has just stripped everything away and the aggressive non-natives have moved in, or because of other reasons, but it's because the original native habitat has been destroyed. And the question is, what do we do about that? In many cases, people who are trying to restore destroyed habitats rely very heavily on herbicides, and this disturbs the permaculturists. So over the years, native plant societies, like our wonderful Virginia Native Plant Society, and master naturalists, of whom there are many growing all the time, have given us many reasons to grow native plants. And one of the chief reasons to grow native plants is that they give us a sense of place. This is a beautiful shot of one of our native woodlands that I do not believe has one single aggressive non-native in it. We have the beautiful black alder by the stream. That's a stream flowing through there. We have the sycamores. We have the oaks. You can tell the oaks by that particular little tan color that they get when they're starting to leaf out. The beautiful tulip poplars, the Virginia pines, and of course our lovely, lovely native dogwood. So when you see a woodland like this, you know you're in Virginia. You're not in Northwest Texas. But Northwest Texas shares our Zone 7 hardiness zone with us, which of course we know the hardiness zones have to do with how cold it gets. So even though we're all Zone 7 from Virginia down through Northwest Texas, this looks like Virginia. And that's a very, very strong reason to grow native plants. Here's another shot of our woodland. And unfortunately, this is the only shot I've got that shows Amelanchier. You see the beautiful little white swath through the middle of there? That's Amelanchier, shadblow, serviceberry, starting to bloom right now with the red buds. Here's red cedar, a whole lot of tulip poplars, and the red maple. So again, you look at this and you look out toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, you know you're in Virginia. And here is a good shot of a particular habitat. This is Christmas fern, our beautiful native fern. And it is growing naturally here on this beautiful bank. So you see it's getting good drainage in amongst all this leaf duff, which has not been disturbed by a leaf blower or anybody trying to rake it up. It's just been settling year after year. And so all the different microbes and natural nutrients, not from chemical fertilizer, but simply from the rotting of organic matter, we're getting all the fertility that this beautiful fern needs. So if you have a spot on your land that has some Christmas ferns in it, your job, the way I see it, if you're trying to nurture native plants, is to nurture them. Keep your eye out for any kind of invasive thing like bittersweet or honeysuckle or such that is coming in here, and rogue it out, and just keep the environment stable with the leaf duff. Don't interfere with the leaf duff, and just let the ferns grow in this beautiful little microclimate. So one of the things I like to do is help people identify the microclimates on their land and go with that. Plant the plants that like that microclimate. Now here, this is Heptacodium, the seven sunflower, which is a Chinese exotic ornamental that is grown for its peeling bark. Can't really see the peeling bark there, but it's very lovely, kind of like a crepe myrtle. And it's very, very interesting flowers. Now, this is an example of, I remember when this plant first hit the market in the 1980s. It was only introduced from China in the 1980s. It was a brand new plant. Everyone was very excited about it. And this specimen here is planted up at Carr's Hill at the university. And there's a beautiful specimen planted at Morven Estate, which the university owns now. I think they're going to be open for Garden Week. You should go and look at all their beautiful old plants. But this is an example of a non-native plant that is not aggressive. It's not threatening anybody's habitat, but it's an interesting addition to someone's plant collection. Now, another reason given to grow native plants, aside from their beauty and their sense of place and the idea that they use less resources, is that they are easier to grow because they're adapted to our particular environment. And the classic example is roses and delphiniums, which are not native and need a lot of fertilizer and spraying. They get all these leaf spots. And so the argument is, well, you plant natives, they're not as demanding as roses and delphiniums. And indeed, that is very true. It is true, as I said, that most natives prefer a lean soil and they don't require a lot of extra nutrients. So if you already have the friendly habitat, keep that habitat up, like what we saw with the Christmas ferns. But all that said, with all the permaculturists' concern about people and projects that try to restore habitat, let's look at a spectacularly successful effort to restore a habitat, which is the Dell at the University of Virginia. You can see it if you just go down Emmett Street. You can see the retention pond that they created there. This, I believe it's getting on 20 years old now. It was a wonderful project done by Nelson Bird Woltz, a local landscape architecture firm. They daylighted an old creek that had been smothered by parking lots and developments. They brought that creek back up above ground. They created a retention pond to hold the storm water that comes off in storms like we're increasingly having. And then they planted the whole area with these beautiful natives and put in a beautiful walking path around it. They've added signage over the years so that if you go there, there are wonderful signs that explain what's going on and give you lists of the plants. It's just absolutely spectacular. And I have to say that they're building a center for contemplation on the edge of the Dell. And when I drove by there the other day, I just had to think, habitat destruction Sometimes it's caused by aggressive non-native plants, but most of the time it's caused by development. And I do hope that anyone who uses the new Contemplation Center will contemplate the idea that, perhaps they could have extended the dell instead of building their building. That's all I will say about that. Now, this is a slide of a lovely lady that I was privileged to be shown through her garden quite a few years ago. This is Pat Willis, who is no longer with us. She was a past president and a key person in the Virginia Native Plant Society. And she took me through her beautiful woodland garden and told me the story about her lovely patch of foam flower here. Foam flower, here, I'll go back to here. Tiarella cordifolia is a beautiful native plant, perfect for a dry woodland shade, beautiful ground cover. But you have to, and see all the leaf duff, and all the leaf duff. But you have to give it its environment. And good old Pat spent the rest of her life pulling periwinkle and honeysuckle out of this foam flower patch. And I believe Phil Stokes told me that she had told him that a lot of visitors to her garden would park on this area before she started bringing it back. So she was also dealing with soil compaction, but she brought this back simply by judicious weeding. And as you can see, it is backbreaking labor, which is why a lot of people end up turning to herbicides. But of course, you end up spraying herbicides in here. You're going to spray it on the foam flower. So it's very, very difficult. Pat didn't mind getting down there, pulling that stuff out. And that's what it takes. That's what habitat restoration and maintenance takes, is a lot of dedication and backbreaking labor. Now here is another shot. This is actually Phil Stokes, another foundation stone of the Virginia Native Plant Society. He toured me through his beautiful, beautiful woodland garden many years ago and showed me this patch of bluebells that he has. And one of the problems that Phil had, and still has, I believe, is the invasive bittersweet coming into his woodlands. And he has reclaimed, in fact, this is an area that he did reclaim from bittersweet. And it was totally overgrown with bittersweet. And Phil used Roundup instead of spraying it, which is very problematic to spray any herbicide because you cannot control where that drift goes. But some people who do use it will use the cut and swipe method. They will cut the weed they're trying to kill and immediately paint it or swipe it with the liquid herbicide. This way you don't have to deal with it floating around in the air. Now, Phil told me that this area and other areas where he finally got rid of the bittersweet, he has not had to use herbicide in these areas for many, many years. But there are still areas on his land where he is using it very selectively in areas where it's just too much for him to pull it up. And he made a point to me that I thought was very telling. He said to me that his selective use of herbicide in these situations allowed him to restore more habitat. And it's true, it does. So, it's a very, very complicated issue as to whether, oh my God, I'm never going to use herbicide at all or not. That's up to you. I myself, my personal feeling, I guess we'll all get into what we feel about this personally. I have seen so much poison applied to the earth that I am just not going to be involved in putting down anymore. But I do not judge people, and I actually admire people very much who do use it in their judicious way and who are out there doing the hard work of restoring habitats. And loss of habitat is key to this whole issue. That's what Sarah Stein started out with in Noah's Garden. It's what Doug Tallamy is talking about in Bringing Nature Home. It's what Tyler Ryan and the permaculturists are talking about in, ecological functions. It's habitat restoration and loss of habitat. And the idea of restoring these original plant communities is the whole idea behind this. But one of the things that the permaculturists bring up is, in certain cases, can we really restore it to the way it used to be? And are we going to expend lots of herbicide and lots of money trying to restore it to the way it used to be? Now, Sarah Stein in Noah's Garden was one of the first to pick up this idea of people in a suburban community planting wildlife corridors and planting shared plantings throughout the development that wildlife and insects could use. And there's a beautiful residential development that's quite a few years old now called River Bluff in Charlottesville. It's still there. This was taken many years ago. I hope everybody's still doing well back there. But this is a beautiful substitute for lawn here. I've got pictures that I do not show you tonight of rainwater and stormwater just washing off of lawns. Lawns do not hold water. They just sheet it down for all of that dreaded overflow that flows down onto asphalt and washes all the pesticides and pet waste and such into our waterways. So the more we can do to stop that hard water flow, the better. And this is a beautiful example of doing it with an all-native perennial swale here. You see how they've got mulch and rocks down here at the bottom. And I believe in this particular development, I believe this is a permeable surface here. If you are adding any kind of hardscape to your landscape, a walkway or a driveway or such, please look into a permeable surface. You can lay stones on the earth, you can put gravel down. You don't want to put down asphalt. You don't want to put down a hard, impermeable surface that will just wash water away. So if you're starting a project, look into the impermeable alternatives to asphalt. Now, there's a big difference between habitat gardens and habitat restoration. A habitat garden is like this swale we're seeing here. People planted this on what was previously turf, and they used only native plants to do it. And people will do that when they plant a butterfly garden. You know, the thing about butterfly gardens, the old butterfly gardens, people would always have the butterfly bushes there, which of course are non-native, but they feed the pollinators. And so now when we make butterfly gardens, I always like to add a butterfly bush, even though they do tend to seed, but we add the non-native plants also that feed the caterpillars, and we just do the whole circle for the butterflies. And then meadow gardening is another kind of habitat gardening where people are, maybe they stop mowing their backyard. As one of our people were talking before we started the session tonight, you just stop mowing, mow it once a year to keep the woodies down and just see what comes up. So these are different ways to do a habitat garden, a habitat for butterflies, a habitat for the meadow, etc. But when you're getting into actually restoring a habitat and finding out what was the original plant community, how do we really restore this habitat, that's a whole different thing. And I just want you to be aware of that. Now that's a picture of a native Virginia landscape. Here's the cow pasture with the cow patties and our beautiful native cedars and Virginia pines and our red maples and our tulip poplars. Aside from the pasturage, which I guess we'll accept as natural, this is a picture of a native natural habitat. This picture, I'm very sorry to say, I do not know the name of the designers of this bed, but I just think it's a beautiful example. This is a garden filled with native plants at the edge of a backyard that is looking out onto a natural landscape. So it reflects that just absolutely beautifully with yuccas. Yuccas are a plant native to zone 7, and some, which I believe is switchgrass here, and a bunch of different asters. So this is a totally native plant planting that is picking up on the natural environment around it in a very, very successful way. But this is not this. This is a real native habitat. The hand of man has not been here. This is native. And fortunately, I do not see any invasive aliens here, invasive non-natives. I see the beautiful chinkapin with the catkins of the male flowers there, the woody chinkapin. And that, I believe, is a black haw viburnum. And I believe there's some sassafras and maple in here. So that's a native habitat there. And this is a native habitat. We have the stream, we have the beautiful pinkster azalea, which is our native azalea. And then we have the alders and the maples and the tulip poplars. So these are native habitats. They're not habitat gardens that people have created. This is the kind of habitat that you would find on your land that you would try to preserve. Now, this is not to say that native plants cannot be invasive themselves. And this is a perfect example is northern sea oats, which is all over my property on some very difficult, dry, shady banks. The birds love this. I see them eating it in the winter. I find it very attractive, but you don't want to plant this in your perennial border because it will take over and it can present seeding problems. So be aware of that. So not all natives are non-aggressive. Some natives are quite aggressive. And there's the example of the common violet. Many people who love their turf grass and love their lawns will kill these violets with all sorts of pesticides. These violets are the host plant for the spangled fritillary. And to me, they're very, very beautiful. I would never want to kill these things. To me, this is a beautiful lawn. Just mow it after the violets bloom and everything's fine. But violets are very invasive. I have a patch, especially moist, low spots where it's difficult to grow grass. The violets are very happy there. I have a place where I've been pulling garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is another invasive non-native plant that I have decided I'm going to rogue out because I have a good patch of violets. And all I have to do is pull out a few garlic mustards, and hopefully my violets are going to outcompete that. And I'm very interested in seeing aggressive native plants that seem to be able to hold their own with non-native plants, like the northern sea oats. This thing is outcompeting anything. I'm not seeing any non-natives in there. It's just the chasmanthian. And I suspect in my low wet spot, if I can keep the garlic mustard out of there long enough, I think these violets are going to take over too. So that's a good thing. Now, not all gardeners are wedded to totally doing only native plants. Many good plants people combine natives with non-natives. Colston Burrell is a very noted plantsman up in Free Union, and he is noted for the wonderful natives he has in his woodland gardens with his collection of hellebores, which originate in Asia. So Cole very successfully combines non-natives with natives in a beautiful woodland garden. And the late great crozet gardener Sid Scallett did a beautiful job in his garden in Crozet, combining our wild ginger with Asian azaleas and hosta and other non-natives. Wild ginger, Asarum canadense, is a beautiful native ground cover, does very well in dry shade. I don't believe it will take a wet spot. I'm not quite sure, but dry shade, it's lovely for, just like the foam flower. They would make a very good spreading ground cover for that. So that said, we will finish up with a few slides of some more natives. Not all natives are easy to bring home. Some of them are easier than others, and I will point that out. This is witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, one of my favorites. This is a natural along my woodland edge. I just love it so much. It blooms in the autumn. Our Asian Chinese hybrid witch hazels, they're the ones that bloom in the spring, which I have one of them too. I have the beautiful Diane that blooms red in the spring, but you can't beat the native witch hazel. Dry shade. This is my native meadow. All you need for a meadow is a path and a destination. So I've got my native beech tree here, which is my absolute favorite tree. I have a path mown through my broom sedge meadow and a bench at the end of it. And I have my precious hardwood forest here with my shagbark hickory and my pignut hickory and my Virginia pine and tulip poplar and maples and sassafras, all beautiful natives and part of the native woodland. Now, the hydrangeas are very, very popular. These ones that are overexposed in the background, those are Oakley hydrangeas. This is the Annabelle hydrangea in the front. Annabelle is a cultivar. When you see the single quotes, that means it's a cultivated variety, a cultivar of a particular plant. Annabelle is extremely popular because it has great, once these flowers bloom, they turn into these great big, huge white blooms. And some native plant purists do not like to use cultivars. They stay with the straight species. They don't want a cultivar because often the cultivars are bred for unusual flowers, unusual foliage. And some people are concerned that this might confuse the pollinators, especially if you're messing with the flowers. There are different hybrids of coneflowers that have double flowers where the flowers are not that classic old straight species flower. And I can see where that might not be as attractive to a native pollinator as the others. So just be thoughtful about your cultivars. This is a better shot of the Oakley hydrangea, beautiful native plant. I love to use it. Deer will tend to browse it, so it needs some kind of spray on it, or let it get big enough to the point where they're not browsing it. I love it because of the fall color and the beautiful, beautiful seed heads. You can also grow Oakley hydrangea as a hedge because it blooms on new growth. I never do anything to this. I just let it grow. And so the new growth will come and it will bloom on that. But if you were to prune it as a hedge, the new growth would come and it would bloom on that. I've seen it used as a hedge very nicely. Lots of different cultivars of Oakley hydrangea. They have Pee-wee, which is the small one. They have Alice, which is a great big huge one. So whenever you see the cultivar single quotes around a bush, a shrub, or a perennial, do your research and find out what is this cultivar? Is it because it's a dwarf? Is it because it's got a double flower? You know, because there will be some reason that they have bred it to have that name. Now, this is a native planting. I believe this is at the Dell. This is switchgrass, a beautiful native grass, and bayberry, a wonderful shrub. It gets rather large, but they're both great for the wildlife and very, very attractive. You put a little dash of red in there, like with the winterberry, and you've got a beautiful, beautiful combination there. This is Inkberry. This is a native holly. If you look at the little leaf, you can't really see it here, but if you see an inkberry, look at the little leaf and you'll see little tiny serrations on the edge of the leaf, which shows you that it's a holly, not a boxwood. A boxwood leaf would be totally smooth. And inkberry is the go-to substitute for a native substitute for boxwood. Unlike boxwood, inkberry loves moisture, and they will actually grow very well in a wet spot. If you have a difficult wet spot, put an inkberry there. They will also take full sun, and they'll take good drainage, but they like the moisture. They'll suffer in there and they won't be as vigorous if they're in a real dry spot. But they are evergreen and they are a native holly. Now, here's an example of a cultivar of Leucothue, drooping Leucothue, which is a beautiful plant. And there is a straight species, Leucothue fontanesiana, and there are other species of Leucothue that are all green. Now, this particular one, Gerard's Rainbow, of course, people who love the color and the speckled, they love this because of this. Now, whether this makes it unattractive to native pollinators, I do not know. But it's a very beautiful plant. Leucothue is one of the tricky natives. They like it moist, they like it shady, they love to grow by water. If they're happy in the site, they will grow very well. If they're not happy, they're going to droop. So it can be difficult to introduce them. You're trying to introduce them to a site where you think they might be happy. Start off with 1 or 2 or 3 and see how they do. And this is another example of a difficult native to establish, mountain laurel. Quite beautiful. Many people love this, but I've seen people try to establish it on their land where it was not before, and it's very difficult. I think they need particular mycorrhizae in the soil. They need very sharp drainage. If you're fortunate enough to have mountain laurel on your land, nurture it. Keep the invasives out. If you're trying to establish it, plant it high in the red clay. Some people will just dig a very shallow hole and almost place the kalmia on top of that and then mulch on top of it because it wants that sharp drainage. So it would be quite a challenge really to establish this if you didn't have it, but it could be fun to try. I'm actually lucky enough, I've got a whole hillside of this that I love seeing in the winter because the sunlight glistens off of the leaves. And this is a workhorse of the native plant palette. When you're designing landscapes, you're looking for foundation shrubs, clethra, called summer sweet or sweet pepper bush. These are the seed heads. They're blue, they bloom white. They're very fragrant. There's also a pink blooming variety of clethra. Butterflies absolutely love it. This is a shrub that is actually a very beautiful specimen shrub by a walkway. And this is the fall color. In the summer, they're a beautiful dark green, has a very beautiful butter yellow color in the fall, has the beautiful blooms. It's just an all-around great native plant, has the wonderful fragrance. You can also hedge it. You can plant it as a hedge and trim it to keep it in a more formal size. The beautiful sourwood, which is just, to me, the queen of our native trees. I see this a lot in landscapes. It's available in the nursery trade. You know, you can buy it. People use it a lot. You see how nicely it shows up against an evergreen background. And once you learn how to recognize it, some people call it the lily of the valley tree because of these are the flowers, and then they turn into very distinctive seed heads. And once you learn how to recognize this, as you drive around the county, you will see a lot of them in the hedgerows. They're around a lot. Beautiful, a small native tree. This, of course, is its fall color. In the summer, it's a nice basic green. Beautiful tree. This is Fringe Tree, or native fringe tree. I planted this one by my creek. It's very happy to grow there. Again, loves the moisture. Very good for butterflies. Usually blooms in May around Mother's Day. So that's a really good native tree, a good small native tree. Loves the moisture. You don't really want to grow it in a really hot, dry, difficult place. This is the sweet Bay Magnolia. Of course, we've got our giant southern magnolia. That's a beautiful native tree also, but of course takes up lots of space. The sweet Bay Magnolia, that's Magnolia virginiana, is smaller blossom, smaller leaves, still very fragrant. Number of different cultivars out there. I think this one is called Moon Glow. They love the moisture also. It'd be great for a moist spot. And they tend to be shrubby. They don't really tend to be single trunk. They want to put up multiple stems. That's the way they want to grow. It'd be great for a grove in a low wet spot. This is a native fern. I love the ferns because the deer don't eat the fern. This is hay-scented fern. This is a natural outcropping of it on a steep bank. But you can buy bare root cuttings of hay-scented fern. You can also buy the fern itself in a little pot. Would be wonderful for planting on a dry bank. Dry shade can be a very difficult microclimate. Some ferns like moisture, but this hay-scented fern really will take the dry shade, and it will colonize, it will spread. So if you have it on your property, nurture it. If you're trying to plant a difficult dry bank, hay-scented fern, and you've got deer, hay-scented fern would be a great choice. The lovely little Trillium that we see now, what is it surrounded by? periwinkle, and a piece of English ivy. So there are some other little trilliums in this bed. So and look at all the nice leaves, and there's, I believe, some Christmas fern. So you would want to pull the periwinkle out, at least to get it away from the trilliums. And you want to get rid of that English ivy and nurture the habitat so that the trilliums can spread on their own. That's a very difficult, specific site, just like Jack in the Pulpit, little wildflowers. People will mistakenly try to transplant them from the woodland, but what they really need is the particular soil and mycorrhizae that are in the soil where you find them naturally. So if you find these on your property, don't mess with the habitat, just weed out any invasives like periwinkle or English ivy to give the trillium room to spread. And here's a lovely wood aster, the many different native asters, all great for the woodland, great for the pollinators, quite very, very beautiful. This wood aster is very, very delicate. But there are other asters, the purples and the pink, the New England asters, that's a native. All right, and so we have made our way here. I will screen share this. So if any of you are wondering about the books that I've mentioned, and here are a couple of websites, there are many more, please feel free to contact me at hollowgarden.com. Kathy at hollowgarden.com is my email, and I can put you on to other sources of native plants. And here's a list of all the books. As you can tell, I'm a bookish person. I tend to learn things from books and then go outside and look at things. But if you don't, just go outside and try and take care of your plants. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Susie, and any questions that we have.
Thank you for all that information. It was really great. I learned a lot. I wish I had millions of dollars to plant all these natives in my yard. Let's see what questions we have. So, aren't the webworms invasive?
Well, now that's very interesting. I am not familiar with using the term invasive for insects. I'm more used to hearing it applied to plants. So invasive, I would take to mean that they are taking over a habitat to the detriment of other insects. And as far as I know, they don't do that. They make the black cherries ugly if those webs look ugly to you. But I am not aware that they're considered invasive in that they are taking habitat away from other insects. And they are a native sphinx moth. They are the larva of our native sphinx moth.
Okay, today in the Master Naturalist class, we learned that mayfly larvae do not feed on multiflora rose leaves in the water. The implication is that at least some of our invasives on stream banks will not provide food for water microinvertebrates.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that there is a lot we don't know yet about non-native plants and aquatic plant-eating insects.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Very good point.
There was a question about the location of the dell, but that was answered.
Emmett Street.
For restoration, rather than trying to restore the past conditions, and when we plant long-lived species in general, we should think about what the future climate will be and plant resilient species that will persist in the future.
Very good point. A lot of people are really into drought-resistant plants now.
Yeah. So one person said it's too late for them to re-asphalt, but the problem with gravel is the expense of replacing it each year.
Mhm. And gravel will wash. I know. But do look into other impermeable. I know gravel has its problems. I've got gravel and I've seen it. And but there are other forms of permeable surfaces. So just Google it. Google permeable surfaces and see all the different things. And I think in the Living Landscape, they have some good photos of that too.
Are cultivars avoided by native plant lovers?
Some purist native plant lovers do avoid the cultivars because they feel that, say, a native perennial like the coneflower that's been cultivated to have a big double flower, they're concerned that that double flower is not the single flower that the native insects are used to. And there are other considerations. And other people, they're trying to restore or plant what a truly native planting, and they don't want the cultivars, they want the straight species. But it's a matter of taste. Like with all the Oakley hydrangeas out there, to me, the flowers are all similar enough. I'm not worried that I'm going to be starving any of the local insects. And when I choose an Oakley hydrangea for a landscape, some of them are dwarf, and sometimes I will want the smaller ones. Sometimes I'll want the bigger ones. So in that respect, that cultivar, I'm glad to have that choice. With the perennials, I think it gets more dicey because sometimes they're cultivating those perennials for all sorts of weird flower effects.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is do you understand how the homegrown natural park idea works? Does your yard have to be 100% native to join the map?
I have not heard of that initiative before. And I don't know. You would have to ask them, if they want you to be. Hopefully they wouldn't restrict it and they would let everybody in, because my opinion is the more the merrier, the more people you have involved, the better. Now, someone earlier, before we started, was talking about the no mow movement, the idea that people would stop mowing their lawns for the month of April or the month of May, or some people just stop mowing their lawns and just mow them once a year. But I'm not familiar with that particular initiative that you named.
This is a question I was thinking about too. What mulch is beneficial and sustainable for moisture retention? Just leaves?
Yeah, mulching. Oh my Lord, mulching is such an issue. One of my pet peeves is over mulching. For anyone who's growing native plants and this kind of habitat thing that we're talking about, do not use shredded hardwood mulch. That can be very sterile. I mean, eventually it does rot. But the best mulch, I would say, is rotted leaves. A long time ago, people would burn their leaves or bag up their leaves or whatever. But for many years now, Panorama Pay Dirt, the wonderful, wonderful farm out there north of town, they, I think, have an arrangement. I think they purchased the leaves from the city of Charlottesville. Anyway, they take all of our leaves and they make wonderful compost from them. So you can use compost as a mulch, or you can use shredded leaves. Just shred your leaves. That would be the ideal mulch. But again, I will say, if you're trying to establish native plants, especially native ground covers, you're trying to get the plant to cover the ground, not the mulch. So a little bit of good light organic mulch like shredded leaves would be perfect at the beginning. I'm talking about native ground covers now. And then your goal is to get those native ground covers to cover the ground, and you won't need any more mulch. The idea of having to remulch the landscape every year with fresh mulch is very, very wrong-headed. Need to reconsider that. Too much mulch is can be poisonous to a landscape. So be very careful with the mulch you use, and don't use too much, just a couple of inches, and always keep it away from the crowns of the plants. You don't want to smother the crowns of the plants. And if you ever see a tree going into the ground like a telephone pole, or that has volcano mulch around it, go up there and move that mulch away. You always want to see the flare at the bottom of a tree trunk. You just want 2 or 3 inches of mulch around a tree. 2 or 3 inches of mulch around a tree can be good. It keeps the machinery away from it. It protects the roots, moisture retention, weed suppression, but no more than 2 or 3. When you get into 6, 8, 12 inches of shredded mulch, no air is getting in there, no moisture is getting in there. It's all just shedding off.
That's good to know. I'm about to plant a dogwood.
Okay. 2 to 3 inches of a light organic mulch.
Next question is, would you please share the conversation from earlier about getting rid of stiltgrass?
Mm-hmm. There was a lady who spoke about mowing her stiltgrass. And when I was reading about stiltgrass, that was indeed the key that I read about if you keep mowing it so that it cannot bloom. Because apparently, and I'll be happy to open this up to anyone who's got more information about the stiltgrass, but my understanding is that it spreads through reseeding. So if you have a patch on your property that you can't pull it all out, mow it so that it doesn't reseed. But on the other hand, I read that the seeds from the stiltgrass live a long, long time. So you're going to have a seed bank there for a long, long time. But that other person was talking about mowing as a way to keep the stiltgrass from spreading. And my understanding is that that indeed is the case.
I can quickly say, because I was the one that said this, that my backyard, I just kept it mowed before it went to seed. I mean, I let it grow up, but the whole backyard was overtaken with stiltgrass. And now, after about 4 years of religiously doing it, I've got clover and violets covering the whole back.
Wonderful.
So, and I didn't plant anything else. I just kept mowing that stiltgrass.
Wow. Is it full sun?
Is it what?
Is it full sun?
Not completely, no. It's some parts of it are.
Shady and moist, right?
Yeah, it's moist.
Yeah, that's what stiltgrass likes. Well, congratulations to you, Liz.
Yeah.
On getting rid of it. Yeah.
So you have one more question so far. What is a native evergreen tree choice?
Oh, red cedar. Well, red cedar and the American holly. I love the American holly. Many people choose Chinese hollies because they're very fast growing, and the American holly is indeed a slow grower. But that just means when you buy the initial one, put out the bucks, get a bigger one. But there's nothing more elegant in a landscape than an American holly. The birds love it. And when they poop out the seeds, Doug Tallamy isn't going to be worried about it.
Okay, well, several people have thanked you for all of this information. It was excellent, informative, beautiful photos. And I would like to thank you. I really appreciate that you came today.
Thank you, Susan.
This talk was so interesting and so informative. Thank you for spending time with us this evening. We hope that you all enjoyed and learned a lot. We hope that if you haven't visited Ivy Creek Natural Area and Historic Riverview Farm, that you will do so soon. We're going to have another Ivy Talk on May 26th. It will be presented by Miss Lucille Smith, and we'll discuss the history of Albemarle Training School, which is so closely related to the history of Riverview Farm. We hope that you will join us to learn about that school and to learn about the role it played for African American children seeking an education. You can sign up for that event just like you did for this one, and that talk is also free and open to the public. We have a few other important events that we'd like to share with you that are free and open to the public. As we celebrate Earth Day, there will be a native plant sale at Ivy Creek Natural Area this Sunday, April 24th, and that will be hosted by the Jefferson chapter of the Virginia Native Plant Society. We will also host several guided hikes in celebration of Earth Day. We will have a guided wildflower walk, two of those on Friday, April 29th, a geology hike on April 30th, and a tree and forest walk on Sunday, May 1st. For more information or to register for those, please email me at susie@ivycreekfoundation.org. And also, if you enjoyed this talk and would like to support what the Ivy Creek Foundation is doing for our community, please consider going to our website and becoming a donor today. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening. Kathy, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susie. I enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
If you ever come out to Ivy Creek